Well, thank you. That was good. I think after COVID, I think we realize how important it is to be together and to work with each other and to talk to each other. Thank you. Thank you, folks. Thank you. Well, good morning. When we walked in this morning, I observed something really fascinating. We had Penelope, Jason, and Tiana, children, leading us in this morning. I didn't ask the little girl, Penelope, and she stood with me, and I'm so glad for her strength. And when I grew up in these circles, and I'll get to that a little more later, as a child, we should always have safe spaces for our children, that they're safe enough to be in these assemblies, that we're respectful enough to each other, that our children are in this space. And I'm happy that those young ones are here, because they're the ones, it's like a blink of an eye. I grew up, as a chief's daughter, and in the blink of an eye, you're standing here and you're having to make tough decisions and work with different levels of government. But before we get into that, Hanin, Buju, Tanse, Wache, Miigwech, Apachikajinandam, Akanakabijayanoma, Nungam. It's so thankful that you're all here. Greetings to everyone that's here. And we acknowledge and we hold up the drum, the eagle staffs, and all the ceremonial items. Miigwech Cheyenne for your love, your prayers every single day. Miigwech to Eagle River Singers and Elder Kevin Deere for your opening prayer this morning and your teachings. We also acknowledge and we welcome all chiefs, council members, elders, proxies, and many of the ministers, lieutenant governors who are here with us today. And that leads me into the Lieutenant Governor of Quebec, Manon Jeanette. We are so proud of you, a First Nation woman as the Lieutenant Governor. We are proud of you. We also acknowledge the Premier of Quebec, François Legault, and the Mayor of Montreal, Valerie Plante. We also want to acknowledge newly elected Grand Chief Cody Diabo of Kahnawake Nation. Congratulations, Cody. Yeah, so Saturday was his election. Also, Regional Chief Ghislain Picard for welcoming us to your territory. Miigwech I've watched you since I was small. So I'm so thankful for your love, your kindness, and your guidance at our executive table. I also want to acknowledge the 43 First Nations located in Quebec and Labrador that represent 10 different nations: the Abenaki, the Algonquin, the Atikamekw, the Cree, the Huron-Wendat, the Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, Innu, Mohawk, and the Naskapi. Miigwech, thank you for welcoming us to your place. Yeah. And welcome to this year's 45th Annual General Assembly for the Assembly of First Nations. This year's theme, Strengthening Our Relations, highlights the importance of our connections on multiple levels. Connection with our nations, connection to this country, connection with each other. It also means connecting with our families and our children. I want to thank my own family for their love and support. My children, Kyler, Colt, and Jade, for inspiring me to work hard every day for First Nations children. My partner, Curtis, for being such a good dad. I couldn't stand here today if I didn't have a good father for my children. And every day I know he's in the education system, and I never have to worry about my children because I have such a strong father for them, and I'm glad for that. And my mom for her love. I've seen her here, and her grace, her strength, and her prayers. And my dad for his love and his guidance, and for being such a great father. Thanks to my dad, I grew up as, he was always a chief, and it was always busy in our household, and we've seen how difficult it was in our First Nations communities, the poverty that has been inflicted on our people. His dad was a chief too. His dad's dad was a chief, and his great-great-grandfather was a chief who had signed Treaty Number 2 in 1871. And we hear stories through our people in our ceremonies of Chief Woodentent back in the 1700s and 1800s when they had worked together to make sure that We were communicating, even with the Crees, our allies, to protect ourselves and to make sure that we could be standing here today. And I thank my ancestors for their strength, for their determination, and my dad's teachings on treaty. We have the original treaty medallion from the Queen's representatives from the 1800s, and it's always a constant reminder to our family what treaty means. That treaty is forever, that our relationship, our inherent rights are forever. For as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the river flows. When I was 4, the Assembly of First Nations was a place that I went to with my parents, and then with the previous chief and the council. My dad was on council at the time. And we went to gatherings where there were important discussions on what the Indian Brotherhood meant, on what the Assembly of First Nations meant. Nobody could afford a plane ticket at that time, and we drove, people drove from their cars from all over this country so that they could be gathered like this. It probably wasn't as fancy as this. Nobody had air conditioning at that time. We were in tents outside. And it was standing room only. And without that teaching, I listened to many of you, and I've listened to many of your parents. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for that, for having me in those spaces without being surrounded with my parents. As well, I want to commend my mom and dad, because I know Dad had some health problems recently, but I want to say this. Miigwech for giving me an alcohol, drug-free, and violence-free home. Miigwech, miigwech. They'd also made sure that they gave me it wasn't the best education because we were on reserve and there was a lot of shortfalls on that, but they did the best that they could with what little we had to make sure that I tried to learn about this world, and I'm thankful for that, Nizagi. And that is something that we want for every child, every First Nations child. We need to go back to that and to be surrounded by our families, by our cultures, their traditions, and our languages. Vice Chief had just said, Regional Chief had just said, our languages, that our young people go back to that. The Assembly of First Nations, and here we're all like family too. So we're very glad you're all here. And sometimes we will have debates. We will have division or discussion, and that there are thousands of people. I want to also thank the thousands of people that are watching us, thousands of them streaming online at the moment. It is time to see the AFN, and it's nice to see the AFN alive and well again. The registration, it's still lined up. I don't think the AFN is going anywhere soon, and I think that we're stronger than ever together. Do we have things to work out? Absolutely. So we are optimistic. We're excited about our future. Through unity and respect, we will build strong bonds and create lasting impacts and build upon the vision of our nation's chiefs and elders who came before us. They wanted us to be in this together. We recognize our strength lies in the unity of First Nations. Our voice is more powerful when we stand together to advance our shared goals and rights. We recognize that chiefs are the cornerstone of this organization. This is your assembly, chiefs. This is not the staff's assembly. This is not my assembly. This is your assembly, and we cannot forget that. As the first mother to ever be sworn in as national chief, I've benefited from your vision, from sitting and listening to you, the wisdom of the elders from right across this country, the executive leadership, previous chiefs, previous national chiefs, listening to them, learning from them. That is why we must acknowledge the work of New Brunswick Regional Chief Joanna Bernard Miigwech for your support. And as interim national chief, she helped rebuild the AFN's foundation. It was not easy, but she took the task with strength and determination. So Miigwech, Chief. Looking back over the past 7 months as your national chief, there's not been a day that we have stopped working for our children, each and every one of us. For too many years, we've been fighting to fix a broken child welfare system in the courts. And because of your unity in this fight for justice, we reached a historic turning point last year with the largest compensation settlement in the history of this country. We would like to thank the representative plaintiffs for their resilience through this process. They have been pillars of strength for the thousands of children and families who experience discrimination. And let's hold them up. Karen, Melissa, Ashley, Noah Buffalo Jackson, Carolyn Buffalo, Richard, Xavier Mashum, Jeremy Mwasagi, Jonathan Mwasagi, and Zach Trout. We lift you all up if you can stand for a moment. in the room somewhere? Thank you. Well, we were successful in working together, and all of us coming together in this assembly to be joint on one resolution on that and negotiating the largest settlement in Canadian history. There's still so much work to do. Over the past few weeks, we have secured a commitment from the Prime Minister for a formal apology in the House of Commons, and we look to you for direction on that, to start planning that, to find out what the best way is. And we need to have those discussions across the country. They're not easy discussions, but our people and families that have been impacted by the discrimination deserve that from all of us. We've received also federal court approval of a distribution protocol, which will allow for compensation to start rolling out later this year. In February, we celebrated a historic victory at the Supreme Court on the constitutionality of the Act respecting First Nations children and youth. Although we never want our laws and our traditional laws, we've never given up our right to our children. We don't want them in the Supreme Court. Sometimes things end up there. But it was a landmark ruling in our favor. And because of the Supreme Court has now acknowledged Canada's constitutional framework, which allows for pathways for First Nations inherent rights to be recognized, First Nations will no longer be hindered by unwilling provincial partners in the exercise of their inherent right, laws, and jurisdiction. This is a huge ruling. Yesterday, it's been a busy few weeks. And yesterday, we received a draft offer from the Government of Canada on this issue. Of course, we have compensation. This is now on long-term reform. We have to talk about Jordan's principle down the way. But right now, we're talking about long-term reform. I'm happy for the compensation here. I think we're all able to discuss that and work that out. But we do have long-term reform. How do we fix these systems on our First Nations communities? How do we come together in a good way? And how do we balance all voices at the table to make sure we put that all in front of our chiefs? And while this offer is under settlement privilege, I can tell you today it's a very significant offer, chiefs. Your regional chiefs will have all the details of this offer. We met this morning. They know the number. You're able to talk about it within your caucuses privately from chief to chief. I know that because of settlement privilege, we're not able to disclose to you that number this morning. We wish we could. And it'll be up to you whether that proceeds or not. That is up to you, chiefs. It is a fair offer that will benefit the generations for our children. I believe it will. I think it's a fair offer. And let's never lose sight of what this is all about. It's about our children, about our future. The bottom line is First Nations families are best positioned to care for our own children. And this country has to take notice of that. And we can't take anything for granted. I know that we have this offer, but there's still a minority government in Ottawa. And once they begin to sit again, every day we don't know what the future holds. Like the elder had said before us, we don't know what tomorrow holds. That's why starting this month until mid-September, the Assembly of First Nations will host regional engagement sessions to discuss the details of this offer and hear your views and your recommendations. From there, we will host a special Chiefs Assembly in Winnipeg in September to deliberate and vote on this issue. And we are making sure that Canada is going to pay the bill for this meeting, including Chiefs' travel costs. Yeah, so at the end of it, you will have the final say. Nobody's going to have a final say except the First Nations themselves. Alongside our commitment to fight for alongside our commitment to fight for children, we have been focused on preventing violence against First Nations women, girls, and gender-diverse people. Last month was the 5th anniversary of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women and Girls final report. In response, the Assembly of First Nations released an evaluation of progress towards the inquiry's 231 calls for justice. Regrettably, we can only find 2 calls that have been fully implemented. The majority showed little or no progress. This failure by provincial and federal governments is not acceptable to our people. I hope it's not acceptable to other Canadians either. Many of them are watching, and we ask that you stand with us. Substantive action is needed now more than ever to guarantee the safety for First Nations women, girls, and gender-diverse people. That is why we have been calling on Canada and BC to end the RCMP's damaging efforts to destroy the Picton evidence. And we met with the RCMP Commissioner this weekend, and our regional chiefs across this table right here were united. Things need to get better in this country. Speaking for all chiefs in the room, we want to let families and advocates know that we will never stop fighting for you. The murders and violence have not stopped, and neither can any of us, neither can we. That is why we have not stopped lobbying the federal and provincial governments to search for our lost sisters in the Prairie Green landfill in Winnipeg. It is relief to see that families can finally see some justice. We hold up the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, Grand Chief Kathy Merrick, and our Anishinaabe Premier Wab Kinew, who led this process, and what a difference a Premier can make. Since being elected in December, we have made it a priority to meet with the Premiers. It's not something that probably every national chief has done in the past, but the reality is they hold political power in this country. Premier Kinew is showing that is true. There's real work to do to keep reconciliation moving forward in a good way. Excuse me. Excuse me. Unfortunately, 2 reports from Canada's Auditor General in March demonstrate how much work there is still to do with these First Ministers, particularly on First Nations policing and housing. On policing, the Auditor General identified a distressing and persistent pattern of failure in policing that contradicts the true spirit of reconciliation. All chiefs are struggling with this inaction, perhaps none more than the James Smith Cree Nation in Saskatchewan. In February, we traveled to be with chiefs and members of the First Nation that suffered through the worst mass stabbing in Canadian history. A report from Saskatchewan's coroner confirmed the status quo on policing is costing First Nations lives. The community's strength during the coroner's inquiry honored the innocent victims and inspired us to keep fighting for First Nations policing to be legislated as an essential service with equitable funding to effectively deliver these services to our people. We also want to have clear recognition of First Nations jurisdiction in this area. Chiefs of Quebec and Ontario are also leading the charge on the policing file, and I commend you. Let's also recognize Regional Chief Picard for his tireless work, and the new Grand Chief Linda DeBossage of the Anishinaabe Nation for her years of work on this file. Your leadership continues to guide us, and we look forward to hearing from the Public Safety Minister later today. The Auditor General also revealed similar problems with the government's First Nations housing program. She estimated 55,000 new homes are needed to address the current housing gap. In April, the Assembly of First Nations released a report regarding their commitment at the Government of Canada regarding their commitment to close the First Nations housing and infrastructure gap by 2030. The report estimates that $349 billion is needed to bring First Nations in line with other Canadian communities. This is a number ministers in Ottawa they don't want to hear, but we need to keep saying that number, $349 billion, until this gap is closed. They cannot ignore us. We have to keep working together. Unfortunately, the federal government failed to respond to their own report on this infrastructure gap in April's federal budget. While we saw some new investments, proposals for housing, policing, roads, water will not come close to meeting the demand. With regional chiefs, we met with federal ministers and opposition leaders to clarify various elements of the federal budget and plans to roll out funding, including the new National School Food Program. Last month, for the first time in 5 years, the Executive Committee participated in a First Nations Joint Priorities meeting with federal cabinet ministers to guide our work on these issues over the coming year. This will include following through with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, full implementation of UNDRIP, reform for the First Nations Child and Family Services Program, and Jordan's Principle. We will report progress at our next Assembly in December. The federal budget did include a commitment to provide a $5 billion loan guarantee program to significant First Nations projects. I also, in April, I want to recognize that we had met with Chief Charlene Gale, the chair of the First Nations Major Projects Coalition, for the Coalition's 7th annual conference, hearing about the many tireless First Nations advocates for economic reconciliation. I also want to hold up Chief Gale for her work on that and for pushing the federal government to invest in our First Nations people. Since the budget, we have participated in forums with business leaders about economic reconciliation. One organized by the Bank of Canada, with other chiefs. We talked about principles to consider as we seek economic reconciliation together. First, we must decolonize the Canadian economy and make room for our First Nations economies. At no time were the local First Nations people considered as partners or employees in business. Poverty and the restraint of trade are centerpieces of the Indian Act. Doors were closed to our people, and our traditional gifts of intertribal trade and self-sufficiency were replaced with poverty and a lack of hope. Over the next decade, it is forecasted that $560 billion of projects, primarily in the resource sector, will be launched on the traditional lands of First Nations. To maximize these opportunities for First Nations people, these loan guarantees should be in the range of $100 billion to be meaningful, not $5 billion. Canada's economy will benefit in the decades to come with projects reaching in the trillions of dollars, but these projects will not advance without First Nations support, and that's the truth. Throughout my first 5 months as National Chief, we have made it clear that the Assembly of First Nations is prepared to work with any government, no matter the political party. First Nations priorities need to be Canada's priorities, and we are prepared to work with anyone who is aligned with our beliefs and our vision. We called for the withdrawal of Bill C-53, which continues to be a top priority for our nations. Chiefs are loud and clear about their concerns with Bill C-53, which fails to respect the perspectives and consultation requirements of First Nations it would affect. Bill C-53 must be withdrawn. Thank you. Bill C-53, yeah, it was a resolution that we had passed here, and the government has to take notice. Many of them are listening. Bill C-53 has to be withdrawn. Further, the Government of Canada must properly engage and consult with First Nations rights holders to ensure the potential effects of any similar legislation on First Nations inherent rights, treaty, and Section 35 rights are considered. We want to thank each of our federal partners for their time and interest here today. And the Prime Minister and his cabinet have been somewhat responsive to meeting us, and we're thankful for that. We're also thankful to the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, and Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, for attending this week. There are many memories from my first months as National Chiefs. But visiting your communities, Chiefs, our First Nations communities, is the most inspiring. This is where inspiration comes alive. I think of the buffalo roaming on Poundmaker First Nation in December, right after my election. My friend Blaine's here, and we went up there. The special headdress ceremony with the Blackfoot Confederacy people in January, miigwech. The amazing celebration we had with Rama Chief Ted Williams, who's here in February. The First Nations Leader Summit for the International Day in March with Grand Chief Mandy Gulmasti. I haven't seen her yet, but the April visit with the Chief Polchis and his community, miigwech for the invite. And even my flight home on Air Canada can't ruin that. And we made them change their policies for our people that they can't take our stuff anymore. Aviation. Yeah. Aviation in this country, take note. We can't keep having that year after year, month after month, that our people's things are disrespected. Every industry in this country needs to take note of that. My May visit to BC for the Kanien'kehá Nation in 2024 with their special assembly with their president, Eva Clayton. What a beautiful community you have. Miigwech for welcoming me to your territory. The Ottawa Press Conference with Anishinaabe Nation and the Mushkegowuk Council. You pushed for that, and you pushed in Ottawa. And it's too bad that you had to do that because you thought that was done many, many years ago. But you got your support, and you pushed hard enough that the federal government announced $1.2 billion just a few weeks later because of your advocacy. Congratulations. Last weekend, It's been such an honor being in our First Nations communities. And last weekend I went to Couchiching Powwow in Treaty Number 3, where I met Cheyenne Vandermeer, a young woman that was elected in a traditional ceremony as the first female Deputy Grand Chief of Treaty Number 3. And I think of my home province of Manitoba, where construction is starting on the former Capion Barracks military base, a site that has officially converted to reserve lands and repatriated to the 7 Treaty 1 First Nations. We lift up Treaty 1 and their chiefs, who are constructing Canada's largest urban First Nation economic zone. Congratulations. Yeah. So this is, yeah. This is the hope and the inspiration that we all see, that First Nations from coast to coast to coast are demonstrating that we can manage multi-billion-dollar projects, and we can look after our own, and we can do anything we want. The world is taking notice. This fearlessness was evident last month when we had the honor to spend time with our courageous First Nation veterans on Juno Beach for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. At this moment, I'd like to ask all of our veterans to rise, please, as we thank you. "80 years at Juno Beach," and one of our families showed up on the beach, and we were standing there, and they brought their uncle there and buried their uncle there while we were on the shores. It's a really touching moment, but remembering that First Nations, and I know D-Day didn't highlight it as much, and I told the feds and I told the communications people, I said, our people went there in high numbers, and we didn't have to. But First Nations enlisted more than any other group of people in this country to fight for this country. And we commend you and thank you. And our hearts, yeah. First Nations are also marking our work internationally in the fight for clean water, for climate change, and for human rights. And we lift up all the people doing this work. People like Wilton Littlechild, his 4 decades of work at the United Nations. Chief, I've seen that you were in Geneva, but we lift you up. This summer, all Canadians will cheer as well for First Nations athletes competing for gold against the world's best at the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Tune in. And we're going to do it again, thanks to people like Dr. Wilton Littlechild in 2028 as our game of lacrosse returns to the Olympics. Can you imagine that? Finally. And we lift you up, Dr. Littlechild and many others that stood with you. And we see it in hockey. Based on the last 2 years, just to close off, the message to the NHL teams is this: if you want to win a Stanley Cup, you better have a First Nations player on your roster. Last year it was Zach Whitecloud. This year it was 6 Nations' own Brandon Montour making us proud. So I want to lift up those young players. There's so many of them coming through, and every year, every NHL team, you better have a First Nations kid on there, because you want to win the cup, we have people that are working hard. We see hope in communities that we visit. We see hope in this room. And I think back to how far we have come together, about what things were like when I started working for First Nations as a young person in these back rooms, working for many of our chiefs. 25 years ago, I remember sitting in a room, and I worked for a regional chief at the time, and Phil Fontaine was national chief. And polls showed the low public opinion of what average Canadians thought of First Nations. Pollsters, I remember in that room, didn't want to even tell us the results of that. And we look at stuff like Maclean's magazine that described, I remember being the front page of it, and there was a woman on there, and they were describing Manitoba as the most racist province in Canada. And now we have a First Nations premier leading the way there. I'm so proud of him. And so we've come a long way together, and we believe that the future is bright. And as we look forward to the next federal election and how we will be engaged, we must recall last fall's historic election of Premier Kanien'kehá in Manitoba, which carries an important message to all political parties in this country. They're all listening here today, my friends. In the 2023 Manitoba election, the losing party campaigned against reconciliation. They opposed searching a landfill for missing First Nations women and suggested crime would rise if a First Nation premier was elected. People from all walks of life rejected that party. We thank Manitobans for that, but we thank Canadians, and that approach is wrong. So the message is that if you want to win in this country, you have to start lifting up First Nations. You can't put us in unwinnable seats anywhere if you want us to be part of your space. And you have to start embracing this national movement to reconciliation and not oppose it. With each day, more Canadians understand that First Nation success is Canada's success. I know we've been working our best to work with people across this country. We are witnessing a shift in our relations, and we're all a part of it. We all have a role to play in that. So this week at this assembly, let's get the business done for the nations that we serve. Let's share our ideas, debate, have dialogue, but let's use this opportunity to reflect on our achievements and set the path forward. It's a privilege to me to serve alongside all of you. We have worked with honor and integrity to fulfill trust in this space, and we are making real difference for the future of all of our families and our children. And as the first mother to be elected as National Chief, I believe that we carry a certain responsibility to nurture, teach, and learn from those that came before us. And we hold a vision for the future generations who will rely on our decisions today. So we must remain united and respect the diversity of ideas and the opinions of this floor in the boardrooms and in our First Nations. The strength of the Assembly of First Nations is in the strength of our diversity and our unity. Our foundations are strong and our history is stronger. If we are to prevail, we must remember our teachings and ceremony. There is much work ahead, but by strengthening our relations united, we can achieve anything. So miigwech, merci, buju, gigyaman minawa, mina.